Hello, let me share with you something called Tree Thinning Explained. It is a video by the U.S. Forest Service. This talk features the video, and I've got a little slideshow for you. This relates to a course that I've got coming up, and I wanted to give you a taste of what the course is about. The course is called Wildfires, Fact and Fiction. So let me show you the slideshow and go from there. Go to a little different view here. So this is called, so let's watch a short video by the U.S. Forest Service. We will see why they advocate for quote unquote tree thinning, and then I will give an alternative point of view. I think tree thinning is a bad idea, but it's one of the main things that you hear when, the media, the Forest Service, the timber industry said we need to get in there and thin the trees. And the reason they say that we need to get in there and thin the trees is because there's too much fuel. And if we want to reduce wildfires, then we need to do something called fuel reduction. There's too much of a fuel load. Well, I'll share with you why I think that's a bad idea, mainly because the thing that causes wildfires is not so much the fuel load as how wet the fuel is. And so we want our forests to be a sponge to soak up rainfall and hold on to that rainfall, and so that they will be more wet and not as dry. And when we allow that to happen, then that'll be a good thing, so that the things don't burn as intensely. But then a certain amount of high intensity fire is normal and natural. So let's go through the slides and see what we've got here. Let's watch a short video by the U.S. Forest Service. We will see why they advocate for tree thinning, and then I will give an alternative point of view. So I'm going to click on this link and see how this works. Have I got the right thing? Let me see. I need to share something else on my screen. Present, stop screen, and then present, and go to share the screen again, and then click on that. And here we go. And don't you hate it when that happens? Let's see. Got to go back to the studio. Yeah, there we go. So I'm going to make that a full screen, and then we're going to watch this 1 minute, 20-second video and go from there.
Individual trees require sunlight, water, and nutrients to survive and grow. A patch of land contains a limited amount of resources. When too many trees compete with each other for those resources, some will become unable to resist attack from insects and pathogens. Tree thinning reduces competition for light, water, and nutrients by removing some of the trees in a forest. Thinning increases the amount of resources available to the remaining trees, which improves their growth and ability to defend themselves. Removing small trees can also help prevent fires from spreading into the crowns of larger, more desirable trees. Thinning not only improves forest health and reduces fire danger, it can also benefit the local economy and wildlife by providing timber products, new areas for recreation, and improving diversity of vegetation on the forest floor.
Now, I hope you could hear the sound there. We'll see. Kind of getting back in the groove on this whole thing about recording online. Now, I want to click the present, stop screen, and then present again my handy dandy presentation. And this presentation, so you need to click on this so you can see it. Let's watch a short video by the U.S. Forest Service. And we just did that. And then this is the video, the thumbnail of the video, Tree Thinning Explained. And then throughout this, I want to make reference to the course that's coming up in May, which we'll be able to talk about this a lot more. Wildfires, Fact and Fiction, online via Zoom, May 1st, 8th, 15th, and 22nd. How to prevent wildfires by rehydrating our land, how to protect homes and people without harming our forests. And if you want to find out more about this course or register, you can go to the website of Biodiversity for a Livable Climate, or what's a little bit easier is to go to harthagen.net, scroll down a little bit, and you'll see this graphic image. Let's go to the next slide. So I've got several slides here, and I'm going to go through each one. I'm going to give you a claim and then my response to that claim. I could be saying myth versus fact, but I chose to say, here's the claim they're making, and here's my response to that. So the claim is that tree thinning reduces fuel and removes fuel ladders. So but my response to that is that tree thinning exposes the forest floor to sunlight and wind, drying it out and making it more flammable. In the Wildfires, Facts and Fiction course, we will be doing things like studying this book, Smoke Screen, by Chad Hansen, where he brings a ton of scientific data to show that tree thinning actually makes forest fires burn hotter. Tree thinning is constantly promoted as a way of suppressing wildfires because they say there's too much of a fuel load, but in reality, the tree thinning allows the sun to get in, it dries out the forest floor, it also allows the wind to come through, not only the wind that dries out the fuel, but also the wind that causes the high winds cause forest fires to spread fast. So when the forest has been thinned out, then the wind goes whoosh and blows the embers and fans the flames, quite literally. So you don't want to do that. That's why we don't want to do forest thinning, and yet it is constantly promoted by the Forest Service, the industry, and media, etc. State agencies such as CAL FIRE. Let's go to the next slide. The claim is that tree crowding makes trees more vulnerable to insects and pathogens. I can understand why this might be true in a timber industry context where you just have one tree. Maybe it's pine, maybe it's spruce, maybe it's something else, but you have one species of tree and you want that, you're going to do all the insecticides and everything to make that one species of tree as healthy as you can purely for timber purposes. But so they say here, tree crowding makes trees more vulnerable to insects and pathogens. Just the opposite is true. More biodiversity makes trees more resilient to pests and pathogens because the pests get confused. So my response to the claim that tree crowding makes trees more vulnerable to insects and pathogens is that biodiversity and water make trees more resilient to pests and pathogens. Tree thinning reduces biodiversity, and it also reduces the moisture content of the forest because you're lowering biodiversity. Biodiversity is correlated with water. The more biodiversity there is, the more water there is. So they're doing just the wrong thing in my view. Here's an implied claim that dead trees are bad. We're going to go back through the video once more after this, but when we go back through the video, we're going to see that they show brown trees. Dead is bad. But my response to that is dead trees are not bad. They're good for the life of the forest. Ellen Wall wrote a book called Dead Wood, The Afterlife of Trees. I'm going to teach a course down the road. Dead wood, the life of the forest. Dead wood is the life of the forest. You think dead means dead, but that wood is food for so many things. There's so many calories stored up in that wood, And you have bacteria, fungi, insects, even many birds like woodpeckers thrive on dead wood. They thrive on helping that dead wood decompose. Plus, the more time that dead wood has been there, the more time it has to absorb water. A dead log, especially after it's been there a few years, is going to absorb many times its weight in water. And that dead wood is the life of the forest. And plus, in this book, Chad Hansen's Smokescreen, he will cite abundant scientific evidence. And also George Werthner, I don't have his book to show you, but George Werthner is another expert who's going to be featured in the course. Both of them will say that a snag forest, a snag is a dead tree that's still standing. A snag forest, and why is it dead? It might be dead because of high intensity wildfire. It might be dead because of drought. It might be dead because of beetle infestations or other pathogens. But if you have a snag forest, then that has more, not less, biological diversity. Think of woodpeckers. Woodpeckers thrive on dead wood. Some woodpeckers can make their nests in live trees. Most of them make their nests in dead trees because for one thing, it's softer. Dead wood is softer, so it's easier to burrow in. It's easier to excavate. And it also has more food in it because insects like beetle larvae are burrowing in the dead wood, and the woodpecker pecks in there. Woodpeckers peck on a dead tree not only to make their nest, but also to forage for food. So those are two reasons why a dead tree is more valuable to a woodpecker than a live tree. Another reason snag forests, let me click out of this. Another reason snag forests are valuable is that, let's say you're an owl and you're going through and you're looking for small rodents to eat. Well, those small rodents have a harder time finding cover. If you're an owl, you like to hunt in a snag forest. And then you have things like the spotted owl, for example. The spotted owl is down to about 15,000. The California spotted owl, and they thrive in a dual habitat. They like an older growth forest to nest in, and they like a snag forest to hunt in. So we have demonstrated, statistically, they track owls with these monitors and things, and they find out whether they're thriving. Where do they thrive? Do they thrive in a forest that has experienced a fire? Do they thrive in anyway? They do this monitoring, and one thing George Werthner says is that snag forests are like second only to old growth forests in terms of the number of species they support and the amount of biodiversity it supports. So, the timber industry wants you to believe that dead trees have to be salvaged. Salvage is a form of the word save. So we're going to go in there and we're going to salvage the wood. We're going to save the wood. Save it from what? Well, I understand if you want to take this and turn it into lumber, but that is a timber industry priority. That is not a public priority. It's a private, it's for private profit, not for public. So, the timber industry wants to get in there and salvage, they want to do post-fire logging because they want to take it and make money out of it. And the Forest Service helps them do that. Anyway, let's go on to the next slide and see what we've got here. So what I was saying there is that, the implied claim in this video is that dead trees are bad. My response is that dead trees are not bad. They are good for the life of the forest. Snag forests are among the most biologically diverse sections of a forest, and many species depend on them. Many species of woodpeckers, beetles, owls, predators, small mammals depend on snag forests, including forests that have recently experienced a high intensity wildfire. So they absorb water, making the forest less flammable. So that's important. So dead wood absorbs water over the course of time, especially if a log has been dead for 5 years, 10 years or more. It is waterlogged. When the rain falls, it soaks into that log, and therefore a forest that has not only snags, but downed logs that have absorbed water over the course of time, that forest is going to be, the fire, when it comes in, is more likely to self-extinguish. Go to the next slide. The claim they're making here is that tree thinning reduces competition for light, water, and nutrients, increasing the resources available to the remaining trees, improving their growth and their ability to defend themselves. I don't know where they get this information. How is it that when you go in and you eliminate some of the trees, that you're improving the tree's access to nutrients? If anything, you are removing nutrients from the forest. And who says a tree has to have unlimited access to light, unlimited access to water? These people know nothing about the findings of people like Suzanne Simard, who show that the forest acts as a community. Trees, older trees tend to nurture and even teach the younger trees, which may sound far out to some, but this is pretty well documented, and rigorous science has gone into this. So the claim is that tree thinning reduces competition for light, water, and nutrients, increasing the resources available to the remaining trees, improving their growth and their ability to defend themselves. Like I said, I just don't know where they get this information, because it's contrary to everything that I understand. Plus, you have to, tree thinning, what does that accomplish? For one thing, okay, response number one, tree thinning reduces biological diversity and therefore thereby compromising the ability of the forest to defend itself. So a biologically diverse forest is more likely to be able to defend itself, because it's like getting vitamins and minerals in your food. It gives your body what it needs to be resilient and healthy. Response number two, tree thinning requires heavy equipment that causes soil compaction, reducing the ability of the forest to hold water and support life. Next slide. The claim they're making is that removing small trees can prevent fires from spreading into the crowns of larger, more desirable trees. So my response, okay, removing small trees can prevent fires from spreading into the crowns of larger, more desirable trees. So what they're talking about is eliminating what they call fuel ladders. The smaller, the idea of a fuel ladder is that the fire comes in and you don't want the fire to spread into the crowns of the trees. So you eliminate the undergrowth and you limb up the trees. You eliminate the first few limbs on all the trees so that there's not anything for the fire to catch hold of. Well, that's something you want to do if it's near a building, to protect the building. That's not something you want to do to protect the forest. So, these forest services and the state-based agencies and all these contractors that do the work, they want us to believe that they need to get in there and cut out a bunch of stuff, but it doesn't. It doesn't. It's not going to help the forest. Okay, here's what I was going to say. They want us to believe, they're talking out of both sides. They want us to say fire is natural, and our forests are not healthy because they don't have a natural amount of fire. Well, if fire is natural, why don't you let the fire go? You want to protect homes and buildings, but you want to let the fire do what fires have done for ages. Plus, it's kind of a fantasy that says you can get in there and suppress them. You actually can suppress and control most fires if you're willing to tear up the forest to do it. But it's that once in a lifetime fire that does most of the damage. The LA fires in January were a once in a lifetime fire, and there's no holding them back. You have 100-mile-an-hour winds, and it spreads way too fast for the firefighters to put it out. So that is the fire that does the most damage. Meanwhile, maybe the firefighters do put out or control, maybe, they don't pretend to be able to put them out, but they pretend to be able to control the fires. But, you might be able to control 90% of the fires at great cost, at great expense, at great ecological damage, but you might have a valid claim to being able to control 90% of the fires, but that's the 90% that are the smallest. They're the most likely to self-extinguish. They're the most likely to be easily controlled. And so you have, kind of an illusion of being able to control fires. But, the real thing that needs to be done is to protect home, something called, we'll get into this in the wildfires course, but home hardening, where you protect the home, you make the home ignition proof. Home hardening, defensible space where you take, the 100-foot radius around the house and make sure there's not too much brush, leaves, etc. And so home hardening, defensible space, evacuation planning, and evacuation assistance. That's what we need to be spending our money on. That's what makes the biggest difference. But that's not what we are spending our money on. So my response to this about removing small trees is that, at what cost? At what cost are you removing small trees? And the larger trees are desirable to whom? Aren't larger trees less flammable? If a fire is natural, as the Forest Service claims, then why are we worried about larger trees burning? Let's use limited resources that we have to protect homes and people instead of protecting the forest from fires, which are supposed to be natural. Okay, here's a claim. Claim is that thinning benefits the local economy and wildlife, they say, as a logging truck rolls by. So in the cartoon, which we will see again in a minute, but they say thinning benefits local economy and wildlife. Meanwhile, a logging truck rolls by. I can show you that logging truck is not good for the forest, is not good for wildlife, and is not good for the local economy. So my response is that, does logging benefit the local economy? We have evidence to the contrary. Logging compromises recreational value of the forest, and increasingly, logging is performed by heavy equipment. It's not a man with an axe. It's not a man with a chainsaw. It's heavy equipment, and this heavy equipment and diesel fuel are not purchased locally. They're extracting from the local economy. They're not contributing to the local economy. What would really contribute to the local economy is to not destroy the forest so that there's more of an economy of hiking and things like that. Recreational uses. The claim that they make is that thinning improves the diversity of vegetation on the forest floor. How does thinning, these are empty claims. These are just words. What they're really doing is that you have a pine tree that is the crop, the cash crop, and you have a birch tree that is, considered to be a weed, even though it's very valuable ecologically, it's considered to be a weed. You're going through and eliminating the birch trees, leaving the pine trees, but that is not increasing the diversity of vegetation. That's decreasing the diversity of the vegetation. So my response to the claim that thinning improves the diversity of vegetation on the forest floor is can a forest not create better diversity on its own than thinning and logging with heavy equipment? It is delusional to say that heavy equipment can go into a forest and create diversity. So let's go to the next one. My conclusion here is that the Forest Service is a public agency. Let me come back to the conclusion. What we wanted to do is to watch the video once again And I'm going to have to finagle with this. They make me stop this screen and then present again, share screen, make sure I share the video so we can see that. And here we go. To the beginning, it's only 1 minute and 20 seconds. We're going to watch it one more time and see what, and I'm going to stop it as we go to point out the things I've been talking about.
Individual trees require sunlight, water, and nutrients to survive and grow. A patch of land contains a limited amount of resources. When too many trees compete with each other for those resources, some will become unable to resist attack from insects and pathogens.
So this is something that the logging industry wants you to believe, that there is a reason to go in there and thin the forest, but it's actually, it probably is a way to optimize the amount of timber that you get out of there in the short term, because you're removing nutrients. When you log, you're removing nutrients from the forest, and you can only do that so many times, maybe 3 or 4 times before the forest is just exhausted. And it's anyway, let's go.
Pathogens. Tree thinning reduces competition for light, water, and nutrients by removing some of the trees in a forest.
So it says that it reduces competition for light and water, as if these trees that are left can get more nutrients. What you've done is you've removed nutrients from the forest. Those nutrients are not being cycled, nitrogen, potassium, phosphorus, boron, magnesium, manganese, molybdenum. These are all among the 20 essential nutrients for plants. And if you remove the trees, then they're removing them for lumber, they're removing them for paper, they're removing them for biomass energy, where you just put it into a furnace, you turn it into wood chips, you ship it to England or Germany or Japan so that they can burn it like coal. But you have removed the nutrients from the forest. You are not increasing the access of these remaining trees to nutrients.
Thinning increases the amount of resources available to the remaining trees, which improves their growth and ability to defend themselves.
So what would really improve these trees' ability to defend themselves is to let the nutrients cycle in the forest. And because when you let nutrients cycle, then these trees, which are plants, have access to the nutrients that they need to thrive.
Removing small trees can also help prevent fires from spreading into the crowns of larger, more desirable trees.
So this is a timber industry priority. It's not a public priority, if in fact it's effective. But on the one hand, they say that fire is good, fire is natural, so that they can go in and do unnatural fires like prescribed burns. But they're not giving a good rationale for going into the forest and removing vegetation in terms of, the forests don't need to be protected from fires. Fire is natural. Fire is a way of nutrient cycling. What we don't need to do is expose the forest to more fire than they already have.
Thinning not only improves forest health and reduces fire danger, it can also benefit the local economy.
So this is a part where they talk about benefiting the local economy, and this is illustrated by a logging truck. Does a logging truck benefit the local economy? I think Chad Hansen can cite studies that show that, counties in California, if you go through California on a county by county basis, the counties that do less logging have higher employment rates. Less logging means less unemployment. So there's that. But you have to look at just these empty claims of being able to, just because you have trucks moving around doesn't mean this is a net benefit to the local economy.
And wildlife by providing.
Plus, they say, and wildlife. This logging industry benefits wildlife. How does that work? I don't think they have any credible claims to the idea that logging benefits wildlife. Logging removes wildlife habitat. Logging is by far a greater source of emissions, carbon emissions, than wildfires. Logging creates 10 times as much carbon emissions as wildfires, and you're constantly in the process of removing habitat. Plus, you're going in there and using heavy equipment to compact the soil, tear up the forest. So,
providing timber products, new areas for recreation, and improving diversity of vegetation on the forest floor.
how does forest thinning improve the diversity of vegetation on the forest floor? These are just words. It's just words. Talk is cheap. Okay, there we go. Thank you, honestly. Thank you for the Forest Service for that video so that we could use it to explain how a forest really works. And looks like we've got a couple of people couple of live viewers. Let me go back to the slideshow and give you my wrap up. Share screen. Here's my conclusion. The Forest Service is a public agency, but they operate in the public interest. Some of us think they are a major source of misinformation that benefits the timber industry at the expense of our forests and local economies, while falsely claiming to protect forests and people from wildfires. This sounds harsh, but is it true? I think it is true. Now, what was the motivation for me? I could have picked any number of topics to teach in the course coming up. What was the motivation to teach a course on wildfire? So the motivation is that I don't think you can understand how to make our forests healthy unless you understand the threats to our forests. And the primary threat to our forest, in my view, is the misinformation that comes from the Forest Service. The Forest Service, only in theory, does the Forest Service exist to protect our forests. Honestly, they're in the business of, they make money. The Forest Service, much of its budget, not most of its budget, but a good portion of its budget is from timber sales. Most of the work that they have dedicated on the ground is from timber sales. So, if you want to advance within the Forest Service, if you want to climb that ladder and make a career for yourself, then you want to follow the lead of the people at the top who are making sure that the Forest Service gets a lot of money from the timber sales. So, in Kentucky here, we have Daniel Boone National Forest. Now I know that Daniel Boone National Forest is constantly being logged. It's being logged to the maximum extent. The Forest Service even brags that they're not in it to make a profit. So they're supposed to be kind of operating our forest as, to be charitable and kind and to be fair. They're supposed to be operating our forests in a way that as if it's a business, like we the people are the shareholders in this business, and they're supposed to be operating the business for a profit on our behalf. But they brag that they're not in it for the profit, which means that they're taking our assets and selling them at bargain basement prices. They're selling them as cheap as they can, not as cheap as they can, but they're not, concerned about getting top dollar for them. Forests shouldn't be cheap. Forests shouldn't be sold to the lowest bit. I'm getting a little bit confused here, but they're the forest, the wood, the timber that gets sold out of our forest should be sold at higher prices. And if we, the people, knew what was going on, we would make some changes. So that's all I have. Thank you for joining me. And let me just one more thing. This is one reminder. This is the Wildfires Fact and Fiction course coming up in May 1st, 8th, 15th, and 22nd. How to prevent wildfires by rehydrating our land, how to protect homes and people without harming our forests. Very important stuff. And the great thing about that, I meant to say this a minute ago, but the great thing about this is that in order to understand, if you understand how to protect our forests from the threats to them, then you have to understand the ecology of our forests. You have to understand the wildlife. You have to understand the water cycles. And you don't have to have a detailed understanding of these things, but you have to have a clue. And most of the public does not have a clue. Most well-intentioned people in the Forest Service and the timber industry don't have a clue. Most well-intentioned environmentalists don't really know what's going on with our forests. And so, you know, for example, in order to become an advocate for our forests, we have to understand how they operate as habitat, you know, how woodpeckers and owls thrive in our forests, and how not to believe what the timber industry is telling us about the value and benefits of forest thinning, the value and benefit of prescribed burns. The only way to counter the misinformation is to understand how our forests work ecologically, so that we can, because, you know, the way things are going, the forest thinning, the prescribed burns are an assault on our forests as they should work. And so anyway, I hope you can join me, and thanks for listening.